In this video, we're going to be going over an Empyrean Forge DPS build in New World. I've been running Empyrean Forge quite a lot lately, and on stream, a lot of people have requested me to post the build that I've been using to DPS that expedition with. So here is the build. This DPS build is going to be utilizing the Greatsword and the Hatchet. We'll talk a little bit more here in just a moment as to why we chose the Greatsword and the Hatchet, but for now, we're going to take a look at the mastery trees. So for the Greatsword, we're going to be running Relentless Rush, Skyward Slash, and Roaring Rupture. So Relentless Rush is going to be very nice to add some additional damage and mobility. We're also going to push all the way down here to Relentless Refresh to reduce the cooldown by 50% whenever we kill a foe. We're going to be running Skyward Slash. We're going to push that all the way down into the disease. The reason we're pushing Skyward Slash all the way down into the disease is because for Empyrean Forge specifically, we have clerics within that expedition. Those clerics are going to be healing their allies, and we want to make sure we're applying disease to be able to take out those trash mobs a whole lot faster. So this helps with this dungeon specifically. And then we're going to be having Roaring Rupture. Roaring Rupture is very nice. We're going to gain a little bit of Fortify, do a little bit of AoE damage, and then we're going to push down here to cleanse some debuffs, and we're going to apply a weaken as well as have a little bit of CC. Whenever we are in the onslaught stance, this shockwave is going to pull foes towards us. That's what we're going to be using it for. You're not really going to be in the defiant stance for this build much, so you don't really care about that, but you do care about pulling foes towards you. That's going to provide some nice CC whenever there's no grav wells or any other clumping mechanic available. And as far as the passives go on the defiant side of the tree, we're going to take Perfect Vigilance. This is going to give us a little bit of Fortify whenever we take damage at full health. We're then going to take Blade Honing, which is going to increase our damage. Then we're going to take Unflinching Blade, which is going to give us grit and a very nice bleed. Grit on our charged heavy attacks, and the bleed is quite nice as well. And then over here on the onslaught side of the tree, the very important passive you're going to want to take is Aggressive Shift. You want to make sure that you can enter onslaught stance at will, and this is going to allow you to do that whenever you hit an enemy with a charged heavy attack. That'll allow you to enter onslaught stance even if your abilities happen to be on cooldown, or if you just want to enter onslaught stance without burning an ability first. And then the passives we're going to take over here just increase your amount of damage. We are not taking Crush the Weak. Usually you would take this, but the reason we are not taking this is because we're pushing all the way down into Sickening Slash for the disease. Typically, whenever you run this for another expedition, you probably wouldn't want the disease, and then you could take this Crush the Weak for the critical hit chance increased by 10% when attacking foe with the active debuff. That's a very nice passive, but because we're pushing down here, I find the disease to be a little bit more important in this expedition versus taking this. You also have the Keen Posture passive, which is going to give you 100% increased critical chance for 5 seconds after you enter the onslaught stance. So taking this is not 100% necessary, although it would be nice. And then another very important passive you're going to take in this tree is Step and Strike. You are going to be burning stamina whenever you're doing your charged heavies, because whenever you do a charged heavy in the Path of Onslaught tree, it's going to consume 10 stamina each. Whenever you get this passive, it's going to offset that a little bit. You're going to gain Empower from this passive as well as restore 10 stamina on hit. Very important passive to take as well. Now let's take a look at the Hatchet tree. And then of course for the Hatchet, we're going to take Berserk, or we're going to upgrade that fully for all the benefits that it gives. We're also going to take Defy Death. Defy Death did get hit pretty hard, but it is still very strong in PvE. This will save your life on multiple occasions. Still, it's not nearly as strong as it was before, but it is still a fantastic ability to take. We're also going to be taking Raging Torrent. This isn't near as good as it was pre-patch, because now, of course, Refreshing Torrent was nerfed a little bit, but Raging Torrent is still good nonetheless to take as a DPS ability. And then we are going to take Rending Throw. In some of the footage you'll see, you may see me also using Infected Throw. I change these out oftentimes, but for Empyrean Forge specifically, I would highly suggest Rending Throw since we're already taking the disease on your Skyward Slash, and we also have Roaring Rupture to apply a weaken. You really don't need Infected Throw. It'd be more valuable to yourself and your team to take Rending Throw to add an additional rend, so that's why we're taking Rending Throw. And then the rest of the passives in the Berserk tree is just going to really increase your damage output. And then we are not taking the passives that require you to use a heavy attack like Relentless Fury or Fortifying Strikes. I personally do not use a ton of heavy attacks from the Hatchet either in PvE or in PvP, so I find these to be pretty useless for me, so I don't take them. If you use heavy attacks, you want that additional Empower on your Hatchet, you could take it, but for me, it's just not something I take in my build. And then for the throwing side of the tree, we're going to be taking Aimed Throw. Aimed Throw is incredibly good. I like this a whole lot. Blocking with a Hatchet doesn't do a whole lot anyway, so I usually take Aimed Throw for that throwing option, for that ranged option. And in this expedition specifically, it is very nice for the last boss. It helps you out quite a lot. With your positioning, you're still able to do a little bit of damage to the boss, so Aimed Throw is something that you're definitely going to want. Then we take Critical Throw, which is going to just increase your critical hit chance chance on your melee and thrown attacks. And then of course you're taking rejuvenating crits, we're taking refreshing throws, and then we're pumping down here to exploitation, which is going to give us additional damage whenever there is a foe with an active debuff. Now let's move on into attributes. A really good starting point for this build would be something like what you see on the screen here: 250 strength, 165 dex, and 100 constitution. This is typically what I'll start with if I'm running with a pug group or a group that I just don't know very well. And then if that group is going good in the middle of the dungeon or maybe for the next run, I'll lower my con and then pump some more points into dexterity. But this is usually where I land whenever I first start running with a group, and then we go from there. Now let's move on to gear and the perks that you're going to want on your armor. So we'll take a look at armor first. We have Mask of the Fearless. This is a free helmet that you can get by doing the quest from the season pass. You just need to go talk to Grace O'Malley, start the quest, and then as you progress through the quest, you're going to get this helmet, which is an incredibly good free helmet to get for this expedition. This isn't exactly what I would put on the build and probably won't be what I keep on this build, but nonetheless, it's an excellent one to get you started and get you up to that M10 or work your way up to the M10 level if you need a helmet without spending a lot of gold or crafting one yourself. The next pieces I did craft, and I'm going to make a follow-up video in the very near future that's going to show you where you can get the craft mods for Human Bane and Human Ward, or some of the really good places to go farm those out, because those craft mods can be rather expensive. But I crafted these. I did get my Human Bane, Human Ward craft mods from the season pass. You can get them from there as well. So whenever I got those, I just crafted these 4 pieces. We went with Flame Conditioning Human Ward on the first piece, Flame Conditioning Human Ward on our gloves, and then we hit Invigorated Human Ward on the pants, and then for the boots, we have Refreshing Torrent and Human Ward. And if I were shooting for full BIS, or whenever I try to really optimize this build, I'm going to be shooting for 5-time Human Ward, 5 times Refreshing, 3-time Flame Conditioning, 1 Relentless Rush, and 1 Refreshing Torrent on the armor itself. The reason that I go Flame Conditioning for this particular expedition is because in the boss fights, there is a lot of fire in both boss fights, in Ifrit and Marius at the very end, and having the 3-piece Flame Conditioning I have found helps quite a lot with your survivability as a DPS, so I really like having Flame Conditioning for this specific set. Now let's move on to the weapons. The whole reason that I'm running Hatchet and Greatsword for this particular build is both of these weapons are completely free and can be obtained from the Empyrean Forge Expedition. There is a little bit of caveat with the Roughhouser with the Hatchet. It has to be an M9 Expedition or higher, so an M9 or an M10, and then you're able to get the Roughhouser. This will drop from almost any named mob within the dungeon, but it has to be M9 or M10. So what I did to start is I went and farmed the Hunting Blade. You can get this from normal Empyrean Forge without having Bane or Ward. You can complete normal Empyrean Forge, and you can start completing your set for pumping up your mutation for this expedition. The Hunting Blade is excellent. This drops off of Sir Eld within the Empyrean Forge, and again, this thing drops from the normal version or any version, and it drops from Sir Eld. So just go farm this. You'll be able to get this excellent sword. It is super good for this expedition. And then you can use something like a Human Bane Vicious or Human Bane Rogue or Human Bane Keenly Empowered, some other hatchet that might be a little bit cheaper for you to get or purchase from the trading post to tide you over until you're able to work your way up to M9, and then you can get this for free. This is an excellent hatchet to get, and this is why I chose to use Greatsword Hatchet for this specific expedition, because I knew at some point I was going to farm my way up to get the Roughhouser and have the Hunting Blade. It was just a no-brainer for me to be able to pair these weapons together without having to roll a bunch of gear or roll a bunch of weapons and spend a lot of gold. I knew I could obtain these within the expedition itself, so I just ran a back bar hatchet for a little while that did not have Bane on there just to get me through until I got to M9. And then once we got to M9, we got the Roughhouser, and now we have a really nice setup with the weapons for free. And then as far as jewelry goes, for your amulet, you really want protection for whichever mutation you are doing. So for example, a frozen protection or a nature protection or flame protection amulet, whichever one. Also, if you're running normal Empyrean Forge and you're not quite to mutations yet, running a flame protection amulet would be ideal for this particular expedition. And even if you are running mutated versions, carrying a flame protection amulet with you and then switching that out whenever you get to the bosses is ideal. But for this build, you can see we have a frozen protection amulet, and then we would be running divine, or ideally you would want health, elemental protection of whatever element, and then refreshing or divine, one of those. That would be ideal in my opinion. And then we have the ring. You can just use the Gates ring for this build. It is basically BIS, or it is BIS in my opinion, for this particular build. So you can go farm this out in Brimstone Sands by doing chest runs in that area. Just go get Legates. It is an amazing ring. I highly recommend you go get this. And then for the earring, I am just running Doom's Chance earring for this. It works perfectly fine for these expeditions. Refreshing toast and regenerating works really well. I wouldn't consider this to be BIS, but it is very, very good, and it works just fine for completing expeditions for a strength build. If you were going to be shooting for BIS, you'd probably want refreshing toast, refreshing and maybe purifying toast on there, or some people even get beloved on their earring. I don't really get beloved on my earring. I don't think that it makes that big of a difference, so I usually don't put that on my gear. I pass on that, and I would really probably shoot for refreshing toast, refreshing and purifying toast. That's what I would consider to be BIS, but Doom's Chance nonetheless is a great earring and a great choice if you're running a strength build for the expeditions. Now let's talk about gems for just a moment. As you can see here, I have all opals slotted into my gear. I find that this works just fine for mutations. Just slot opals to resist some elemental damage, and then slot your amulet for whatever elemental protection, and then of course slot the applicable gem into that amulet. So for example, right here we have frozen protection, and then we have an ice gem within that amulet as well to give us more protection against ice. This works for literally any expedition. Just run opals, run the amulet, and you'll be just fine. If you are trying to pump down to like 5 con, or you're trying to really speed run, then you may want to consider switching these amulets out for like all elemental type amulets to mitigate some more of that damage. But if you're just running expeditions and you're just trying to get through them and gold them, try to get maximum umbrals, this setup works just fine. And then as for weapons, I just run both opals in my hatchet and my greatsword. You could run an opal with a rune glass in your greatsword for really min-maxing it, but I think opal is definitely the choice, especially for this build. I do dodge quite a lot for this build. And remember, every time you heavy attack, you are going to lose some of your stamina. So your stamina is rarely full whenever you're running the greatsword as your main DPS weapon from the onslaught side of the tree. And then for your hatchet, you can just throw an opal on there as well, or you could choose to use a diamond if you think your health is going to be topped off a whole lot of the time. I just prefer opal on there because I find that my stamina is rarely topped off, and I can directly control the amount of stamina that I have, which will allow me to pump out more consistent DPS. And then as far as your Heartrune goes, like a lot of the other builds that I make for PvE, your Heartrune is always going to be something that is subjective. Your Heartrune is something that you're going to run based on whatever your group is running or your particular comp. For the Empyrean Forge, I like to run Bile Bomb just for the clerics that are in there. So I have Skyward Slash with the disease on there. Then we also have Bile Bomb to make sure we're applying a lot of disease and not missing anything. It just makes the expedition a little bit easier. If someone else already has the disease covered or is running Bile Bomb, you could always run Detonate or even Vines if you needed it. Whatever your team needs or is missing, that's what I would recommend. If all else fails, just throw on Detonate and you will be good to go as a DPS. Now we'll talk about how to use this build just a little bit. You have a lot of things going on in this kit, and you have a lot of different ways that you can engage a fight or use this build to fight or to DPS mobs down. Obviously, you're going to want to utilize heavy attacks on the greatsword, but you can open up the fight with a rending throw. That's always a great thing to do for that additional rend on one of the targets. And then you can switch over to your greatsword and you can either Skyward Slash and go straight into Relentless Rush and then start heavy attacking, or if you want a weaken, you can go into Roaring Rupture to apply that early weaken, or you can save your Roaring Rupture until later after you're in the onslaught stance. Remember, you can only group these mobs up with Roaring Rupture whenever you're in onslaught stance. That's the shockwave that pulls them inward. You have to be in onslaught stance for that to work. So if you open up with Roaring Rupture, you're not going to pull the foes in because that's going to put you in Defiant stance. So make sure you're just using that appropriately. If somebody throws a Gravwell out and the mobs are already grouped up, then you may want to go open up with a Roaring Rupture to apply that weaken and then follow up with your DPS abilities. If somebody throws a Gravwell in a different direction or misses the Gravwell, or their Gravwell is on cooldown, whatever the case may be, and you're having problems grouping up the mobs, then you can go in there and you can either heavy attack or you can Skyward Slash, do something to throw yourself into onslaught stance, and then use your Roaring Rupture to group the mobs up, and then go back into onslaught stance to continue your DPS. If you get pulled out of onslaught stance, you can always throw over to the hatchet and then go to Raging Torrent, pop your Berserk, pop Raging Torrent, and you can burn down mobs that way too. Really, I use the hatchet a lot as a lot of utility for this particular build and not for a lot of DPS. Although it can pump out some DPS, it is nice to have whenever you get yourself in a bind. You can swap the hatchet for the Defy Death that it provides. You have a rend, and then on the very last boss of Empyrean Forge, it is super nice to have a little bit of a ranged option with the throwing hatchet. You can just throw the hatchets whenever you need to back up from the boss to continue to apply DPS. That's really what I use the hatchet mostly for in this particular build. But that's it. That's going to do it for this one. That is the Greatsword Hatchet DPS build for the Empyrean Forge that I've been running. I like this build a lot. Those weapons are free. They are excellent weapons to use within the Empyrean Forge. That's what I use. That's why I'm running them. But that'll do it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, enjoy New World content, please make sure to like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate that as well. And of course, we stream every Monday through Friday over twitch.tv/BDLG. Play a lot of New World over there and dabble in some other games every now and then. Would love to have you over there. We have a blast over there. Have a good time. But that'll do it for this one, boys and girls. Thank you again. We'll see you in the next one.